Food. It's everywhere. Some of us have all the food options we could ever dream of, while others have next to nothing. In the United States, food is a booming business that extends beyond mere sustenance. As of 2015, there were 24,000 cookbooks published globally, as well as a plethora of magazines in both print and digital form. Numerous TV shows and even entire channels exist dedicated to the art of cooking. A quick Google search for recipes in 2005 produced 29 million results. Today, the same search produces 451 million hits. Food is clearly important in our day-to-day lives. After all, modern nutritional mores dictate 3 square meals a day plus small snacks in between, which garners a significant amount of planning and thought. But does this daily focus on food indicate its deeper role in the human experience? More importantly, was food as important in the past as it is today? We talk about food a lot in history classes. Archaeological evidence from medieval skeletons tell us exactly how hard life was for commoners in the Middle Ages, both in terms of labor and food availability. Similarly, recent excavations of graves in Jamestown, the first successful British colony in the New World, indicate that conditions were so dire and the lack of food so dramatic that the colonists resorted to cannibalism in an attempt to survive. This same theme of desperation extends almost 300 years later when we spend time talking about food survival strategies of Americans while studying the Great Depression. But of course, food isn't just about survival. A look at early 1900s immigrant food practices show how newcomers to the United States remain connected to their homelands while simultaneously adapting to their new ones. This process of remembering and acclimating altered the entire American food experience into the one we know today. Without our German, Irish, and Italian heritage, the deli, bagels, pretzels, and pickles, just to name a few, would never exist as a part of American cuisine. Our food practices are recorded everywhere, from our cookbooks down to our bones. The food that sustains us physically also motivates decisions we make, which at times come with global consequences. What follows here is a cursory analysis of American food history in 3 parts: survival food, cookbooks as artifacts, and a culinary tour of the Great Depression. Food becomes an exceptionally important detail in times of survival. Slaves on the Underground Railroad, pioneers moving westward, the first colonists to the New World, soldiers, all depended upon one famous survival food in particular: hardtack. This basic cracker-like bread has retained notoriety for the stories told about its unique, hard character. Otherwise known as jawbreakers, worm castles, ship's biscuits, sheet iron crackers, or tooth dullers, this inexpensive cracker-like biscuit appears throughout the stories in history due to its relatively inexpensive cost, durability, and flexibility in use. Americans who experienced the misfortune of eating hardtack lamented the experiences in letters, songs, diaries, and fables. It was during the Civil War where many of the anecdotes repeated today originated. Food was a dire situation for both the Union and Confederacy, though Northerners usually had more options because so many manufacturing operations were available in the northern part of the country. At the beginning of the war, the United States commissioned several commercial bakers to produce mass batches of hardtack. The tough, unleavened bread was then loaded into crates and sent out to assist with the war effort. Since food preservation was not as advanced in the 1860s, hardtack was often one of the only foods which worked well while on the move, specifically while marching, due to its indestructible nature. When it was time to eat, the soldiers came up with a number of creative ways to make the biscuits more palatable. To make a pancake, they would crush the hardtack with the butts of their guns and mix it with river water. Thereafter, the mush was formed in a pan and set over the campfire. In the event that there were no pans, which was not uncommon, the soldiers would cook directly on the coals of the fire itself. If their sweet tooth struck while out in the field and the troops had a bit of sugar on hand, the hardtack was mixed in along with some hot water to make a pudding. A splash of whiskey, if available, would also be used to enhance the flavor. If all else failed, the hardtack could be soaked in coffee to soften it up, though a New England soldier warned that the process might take 6 weeks. It was runaway slaves, however, who might have had the most appreciation for the listless biscuit. If a slave chose to make a break for their freedom on Harriet Tubman's Underground Railroad during the spring or summer, they were fortunate enough to forage for food as a means of surviving the trip. However, many who made the dangerous decision to escape had to do so in the midst of winter, usually just after Christmas. Most sales occurred in early January, so if a family wanted to stay together, they had until December to hatch a plan. Traveling the Underground Railroad in winter was not an ideal pursuit, as foraging for food was no longer an option in the cold, barren weather. Instead, Harriet and her conductors hid warm socks along with squares of hardtack in the crooks of tree trunks to sustain the runaways in the dead of winter. The recipe for hardtack is not especially complex. All that's called for is flour, water, and salt. The ingredients are mixed together, the dough is kneaded and rolled out. The hardtack is cut into 3-inch squares and holes are poked into the surface, approximately 16 for each square. The dough is baked in a 400-degree oven for at least 30 minutes. Upon removal, the hardtack is soft but tasteless. After a few more hours of sitting out, it becomes as hard as a rock. Rumor has it that the biscuits can last for decades. Soldiers fighting the Spanish-American War purportedly were provided Civil War hardtack in their rations almost 40 years later. My family loves to cook. When I was a little girl, my mom collected recipes from everyone on her side of the family and self-published a family cookbook. I received my copy when I went away to college. It still sits on my bookshelf today. This little homemade cookbook acts as a family artifact of sorts. It reveals the foods our family members love to make and eat, not only during the holidays, but day to day as well. The book itself is reminiscent of the MS-DOS days. Its pages were meticulously created on an early form of a word processor and printed using the long spools of tear-off paper, more formally known as continuous form paper. When I think of all the family memories that can be gleaned from this one simple cookbook, I can only imagine what cookbooks with a broader reach can tell us about the past. My mom's family cookbook is one of many in a history of community and charitable cookbooks which got their start during the Civil War. During the conflict, women sought ways to raise money for Union troops through sanitary fairs. Over time, cookbooks featuring recipes of the food and drinks sold at the fair were designed as a new revenue stream. They were an immediate hit. Soon, churches and other organizations needing to raise funds turned to locally developed charity cookbooks. Perhaps the most interesting version of the charity cookbooks are those which were created by the suffragettes. Women across the world contributed recipes to these compilations in order to raise money for women's rights. The Women's Suffrage Cookbook, edited by Hattie Burr in 1886, had 4 pages worth of contributors, many hailing from noble professions such as professors, doctors, ministers, and authors. The pages of these cookbooks feature a plethora of information both in terms of recipes and contributors. Beyond the food and homemaking advice, the cookbooks could also be considered a tongue-in-cheek response to their critics, the anti-suffragists. A woman who could cook and contributed quality recipes was certainly not in danger of the dereliction of her duties at home. They also allowed the suffragettes to reach a broader audience of women, no matter their economic or social status. By this time, cookbooks were a universal language known to all women. America had long been the land of plenty. The farmhouse lifestyle, revolving around the harvest season, provided families with an abundance of fruits, vegetables, and meat. Numerous pies would be served with each meal, morning, noon, and night. The push of industrialization, with the rise of the factory and the migration from farms to cities, began to change all of that. Before long, Americans were entangled in imperialistic conquests and numerous foreign conflicts. It was World War I that had the greatest effect on the American plate. Despite experiencing rationing just a few years before, during World War I, the hunger that struck many families during the Great Depression was a tough burden to bear. The Great Depression was an economic drought that permanently changed the outlook of Americans who experienced the period. For many students, it can be difficult to connect with an era marked by such struggle both economically and socially. In my classes, we use food as a means of connecting with the people who endured the Great Depression. The first assignment we do together is watch a popular YouTube channel called Great Depression Cooking. The star of the channel is 94-year-old Clara, who was just a young girl during the Depression. Her videos feature family recipes, many from her own mother, which sustained the family in tough times. The instructions for each recipe are interspersed with stories about the family and the ways they survived. We watch a video on Clara's dandelion salad recipe, which is a simple collection of foraged dandelions, lemon juice, olive oil, and salt. Students are struck by the sheer, desperate necessity characteristic of the time. Most of them have these weeds in their yards, but have never dreamt of eating them. It's the harsh reality of the salad's simplicity that snaps students into the shoes of a Great Depression survivor. The common experience of eating has prepared them for deeper study of the history itself. Once we've studied the Depression in depth, the causes, consequences, and solutions, we have one last activity, a taste testing. I've taken the time to bake a cake from Clara's cookbook, Mom's Simple Cake. It doesn't come out perfectly by any means. In fact, it falls apart as soon as I can take it out of the pan, but the taste is delightful. The morning of the class, I stopped by the local grocery store to purchase some gorgeous cupcakes for comparison. To top off our taste testing tea party is another of Clara's recipes for bay leaf tea. Food sustains us, but in the process it also defines us. I used to think that death was one of the only certainties that unites all humans over time. For most of us, the act of eating also unites us. However, it is the food we eat and the ways we eat it that set us apart and tells a far deeper story of the past than can be found in any textbook.